So, 100 years on from the First World War, are we reaching a point where in practice its influence on the world in which we live today is finally receding? Is it now as distant from us as the Napoleonic Wars seemed to those who fought in 1914-18? If we get to the stage where we can no longer point to the problems of the Middle East as symptoms of the First World War's ongoing legacy, then the answers to these questions may be affirmative. And yet, there are three ways in which that is not the case. First, there is the issue of how the war began. The assassination of the Austro-Hungarian heir apparent Franz Ferdinand looks typical of an old order. An aspirant absolute monarch, uniformed and addicted to blood sports, and largely devoid of any liberal sentiment, was killed in a backward part of Europe, the Balkans. The episode's Ruritanian quality makes it the stuff of late 19th or early 20th century boys' fiction. But it was an act of terrorism carried out by young students motivated by nationalist sentiment. Today it can be read as a cautionary tale against elevating a violent crime into an international incident, let alone treating it as an act of war. It therefore seems more modern to us now than it did on the war's 50th anniversary, when terrorism was rare. By then, in the 1960s, the independent South Slav state of Yugoslavia, which those students had wanted to see created, looked the most stable and yet most liberal of the elements of the communist bloc. In the 1990s, its dissolution was to prove more violent than that of the Soviet Union. Secondly, there is the issue of how the war ended. The collapse of the Austro-Hungarian and Tsarist empires created a raft of newly independent states in Central and Eastern Europe, from Poland to Hungary, from Lithuania to Ukraine. Even if they were on the losing side in 1918, they emerged as victors from the peace settlement. In 1945, even if they were on the winning side, they lost their independence to Soviet rule. For them, the end of the First World War provides the moment of national birth, and so their current situations provide proximity to, not distance from, that war. Even Austria benefits from this connection with a Habsburg past that can now be romanticized and that can seem tolerant and benign compared with what was to follow it. So while in the Arab world the end of continuity with the war may be the theme of the early 21st century, within parts of Europe the resumption of continuity is more obvious. Thirdly, there is the issue of how the war was fought. It would be good if the peoples of the world took the centenary of the First World War as an opportunity to look forward, as did so many in 1919, not just Woodrow Wilson. Most of what has been said above sees war as shaping the international order, for good or ill. But that is not how the War of 1914-18 is most often and popularly remembered today. Instead, not least because of the emotional force of what those who served rendered as poetry, fiction, and memoir, we see it in terms of personal experience.